So I saw this article in Politico and I thought, wow, this is really amazing context. Now, what I'm about to tell you is pure protein. It's not for the faint of heart. We're going to go through and understand just how drones have reshaped the battlefield. So if that's what you're in for, buckle up. Let's go. The fighting in Ukraine no longer resembles the trench warfare of World War I. Instead, drones have erased the solid front by creating a killing zone. Now, earlier on in the war, we talked about how, this is like World War I. They're involved in this trench warfare. Neither side can maneuver. It was true. Neither side could maneuver. That was not the point. But it was something that they were like stagnant, and they understood that they were there. Now, it was because drones could see what was going on, but drones weren't actively doing something about that. Now they are. The skies over battlefields are now blackened by drones. Some carry cameras and thermal detectors. Others are equipped with bombs and guns. Some merely lie in the ground. So drones have gone through this, like we're watching and dropping a grenade or dropping ordnance, or we're watching and shooting, or we're watching and we're sitting on the ground waiting for a truck to show up, and then we fly up and shoot it, or fly up and blow it up, or whatever. It's pretty crazy what has just changed. Counter drones aim to block them while also hunting for drone pilots hunkered down dozens of kilometers from the front. This is one of the biggest changes, is that they're going after other drone pilots going after drone pilots. That's what Russia's Rubicon unit has been doing, and it's had a terrible effect on drone pilots in Ukraine. The result is a gray area of chaos stretching some 20 kilometers from the front. I think it actually goes a good deal longer than that. And with fiber optic drone, they're trying to get longer Chinese fiber optic cables that are going to allow them to stretch 30, maybe even 40 kilometers, which will only expand that gray zone. Where drones hunt for soldiers, the wounded are left to die because it's so difficult to evacuate them. Supplies of ammunition, food, and water are almost impossible to move up to the fighting troops. That's exactly right. That's exactly the problem that they're having. And when the war began, it wasn't like this. It was a conventional war in many senses. And then drones, that technology has changed the battlefield. We have now switched to a drone versus drone war. Colonel Pavlo Palisa, deputy head of the president's office of Ukraine and a former battlefield commander, told Politico, quote, drones are now able to sit in ambush, intercept enemy logistics, and disrupt supplies. They have also made it more difficult to maintain positions. If you are detected, every weapon in the area will immediately rush to destroy you. That's right. So it's a terrible life or death game of hide and seek with these drones, and these drones are pervasive. Okay, so a new way of war. Drones played a key role in the fighting from the earliest days of the war in 2022, when Ukraine celebrated the success of Turkish Bayraktar drones against Russian armored columns. But when we're thinking of Bayraktars, they were thinking of drones in the way that we had thought of drones for the previous decade, not the way that we're using them now. Like the United States military has these like Reaper drones and other things that are these big drones that can hover over there and fly for who knows how long and detect things, whatever. But that was a very small add-on to what was already going on the battlefield. In fact, when Bayraktars first showed up, I remember that clearly, and they were even celebrating, singing Bayraktar, Bayraktar, right? Because they had this new device that was going to help them, right? So that was how they were thinking about it. FPV drones are totally different and game-changing. It's mutated far beyond that. Ukraine and Russia initially prepared to fight a classic war marked by artillery duels, mechanized columns, and defensive trenches. Okay, artillery duels, Ukraine's going to lose. Russia had the artillery like 10 to 1 in some cases, or 5 to 1 in others, and that was going to be a losing proposition. Mechanized columns, again, Russia had the advantage, but no longer had the advantage once FPV drones could start taking out tanks. Okay, and defensive trenches. In 2022 or 2023 to 2024, however, the war changed and trenches started disappearing. Now, if you remember the trenches were like on the Surovikin line when Russia pulled out of Kherson. Surovikin kept his army intact, and then they built these trench fortifications. And then in the following summer, it was a disaster trying to go across minefields and that sort of thing. And that's what we thought the war was going to be like, and it turned out not to be like that at all because of drones. Instead of long lines of trenches, the outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian army created strong points and observation posts and relied on drones to make up for a shortage of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. Look, you fight with what you have, and the Russians had plenty of artillery and they had plenty of soldiers so they could send meat waves. Ukrainians had neither of those. And so the game changer was FPV drones that could help you pinpoint what you're firing at with artillery so they could save their artillery and use every round carefully. In response, the Russian army began to reduce the size of its assault units because Ukrainian drones proved capable of pinpointing. That's because they had FPV drones figuring out what exactly to hit up in the air, pinpointing and destroying large troop concentrations. So these meat wave assaults, after a while, stopped being effective. Now, back in the old days, back in Bakhmut, the FPV drones weren't really in play. You got to wonder what a battle like they were there, but not nearly enforced like they are now. Remember, in the first year of ramping up drones, they were like, yeah, we can make 100,000. We can make 1 million. Second year, we can make 2 million. Now they're talking about they can make 4 million in a year. Rather than the large-scale meat wave attacks that characterized the earlier Russian assaults when large numbers of men were hurled at Ukrainian defenders, Russia is now attacking in small groups. So the tactics have changed, and they necessarily changed because FPV drones, when they see all these large, huge meat waves coming at them, great, get all the drones, let's go get these guys. And they can wipe out massive meat waves. They can also wipe out armored columns. So we're not seeing the mobility on the battlefield either with tanks. Tanks used to be the lion of the battlefield, no longer. It takes time for Russians to assemble a storming group. So now what they do is they have these small pockets that make their way in and infiltrate, and that's how they've gotten into Покровsk and done what they've done in Покровsk. It's a different tactic, but I mean, it's wasteful one way or wasteful another way. They're crawling and hiding. It takes 2 or 3 days for them to gather a group able to storm our positions. Usually, 2 Russian soldiers pave the way, but only one survives. So they go in 2 or 3 man teams, and a couple of them are taken out by FPV drones. One of them gets away and survives. Well, he's there, and then you do it again, and now there's 2 of them there, and then you do it again, and now there's 3 or 4, and keep so on and so forth. Smaller groups are harder to spot for Ukrainian drone operators, especially during fog or rain. Now, I talked about that before with the fog and the rain. Fog is helping Russians advance faster in Покровsk, and Ukraine's drones can't stop them. That's how they're getting there. Like the motorcycle tactics as well. Those motorcycles are there because, you can see a tank coming and it's slower. The motorcycle, hopefully you have a chance you don't have any protection, but hopefully you have a chance not to be hit along the way because you can hopefully use some speed. Usually 2 Russian soldiers pave the way, only one survives. Smaller groups are harder to spot for Ukrainian drone operators, especially during fog or rain. As a result, we got a deep gray zone where Russians infiltrate behind Ukrainian positions. They're hiding there, multiplying in cases not spotted and destroyed. Foul weather helped Russian soldiers break through Ukrainian defenses in Покровsk in the Donetsk region earlier this month, after a year of attempts, as well as other points along the front line. So they've been trying to get into Покровsk for a long time, but they never could really do it because the drones would be enough of a cover. But if you just send these little groups in, and it's kind of a suicide mission, fortuitously, a few will make their way in and then they'll start to gather. The Russian army is trying to make kill zones as wide as possible, destroying all buildings and shelters with pinpoint strikes to make it completely a bare wasteland where it's impossible to hide. So that's the way that the Russian army does things. They just blow up everything that they can with artillery and then just go take the barren rubble and keep moving forward. Okay. But again, drones, the weather, it's really important. Now, there's also a supply nightmare and a nightmare for medics. Drones are also forcing artillery to move farther from the front and make it almost impossible to use armored vehicles to supply troops. Drones became handy when it comes to delivery and evacuation, battle reconnaissance, and distance mining, tasks usually done by people at war before. Drones make evacuation and rotation, as well as logistics, deadly exercises. Listen to this. Most soldiers currently die during rotation. What? Most soldiers currently die during rotation, trying to get in or trying to get out. That's crazy. Any kind of delivery bears grave risks, so we use drones more often. As a result, commanders are forcing soldiers to spend weeks at the front, also called the zero line, without rotation. Usually during rotation, a car comes as far as 5 to 6 kilometers from the positions. Soldiers have to walk the rest of the road, hiding in terrain from drones, trying to get in, or hiding on the way out. This creates a morale problem. An infantryman who once sat at a zero in a hole for 60 to 165 days will not go there again. And then there's medicine, and trying to patch up the wounded becomes tricky as well, because you have to hide from drones who are pervasive. The wounded have it the hardest, as drones critically undermine the front line, medicine, and evacuation. An anesthesiologist with the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion of the Ukrainian Army, who asked not to be identified only by his first name, said, quote, "Today, an injured soldier frequently has to walk, be carried, or even crawl for up to 5 kilometers from his position until the point where an armored evacuation vehicle can pick him up. Then an evacuation vehicle has to make it through swarms of Russian drones that can reach as far as 20 to 40 kilometers from the frontline positions." Drones also force Ukrainian combat medics to move their medical points farther from the front line, which prolongs the time it takes to stabilize the wounded. Injured soldiers have to stay at their positions for days or even weeks waiting for evacuation, which is sometimes now performed by land robotic systems. And their inability to reach the wounded has forced Ukrainian combat medics to turn on TV medicine using a Mavic drone to talk to stranded soldiers. How about that? On a video, we can see how the tourniquet was applied. Then we contact the fellow soldiers of a wounded soldier and direct them how to properly help him. Drones also become useful for delivery of necessary medicine to the positions. Again, it's changing everything. There are reports from open source researchers that Russia is just abandoning their wounded troops rather than trying to evacuate them just because it's too dangerous. They just leave them alone to die. Enemy troops or enemy drones are also making life much more dangerous for the pilots from them behind the front lines. Quote, "I remember times when you could safely go out to smoke in a 10-kilometer zone from the contact line. Now we do not enter the zone without a shotgun. Fiber optic cable drones are reaching as far as 15 kilometers already, so you have to be extra careful. And again, it's going to reach 25, 30, maybe even further than that." There is currently no doctrine on how to build defenses in depth when you have very few infantrymen on the front line. That's where Ukraine is, very few infantrymen, and they supplement with drones, and that's been their saving grace. And the enemy is engaged in infiltration. And at the same time, when the enemy cuts you off from your connection between the front line and the rear and actively knocks out your drone operators on the front line, that's what they're going for. This is a recipe for Russian slow advances. It's the squeezing effect. This is how Russia's doing what they're doing. They're using drones to great effect, but they're also changing their tactics to these small teams, and that's how they've infiltrated into Pokrovsk. Okay, with all that being said, was that helpful? I hope that helps give you some understanding of how drones work and how both sides are using them and how it's changed the battlefield irreparably. Thank you, my friends, for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. Tell me what you thought in the comments below. Shout out to Declan Kearns, an undergraduate YouTube member. Thank you for your support, and thank all the rest of you for being the kinds of people that care about Ukraine.